The weight of the truth crushed Marissa as she stood in the dimly lit room, the phone still cold in her hand. Her breath came in short, jagged gasps, the words of the call echoing in her mind. "Your mother is alive." A rush of conflicting emotions flooded her chest. It had been 15 years since the accident, 15 years since the world she knew shattered. She had long accepted the loss, the finality of it. But now, standing in the midst of this revelation, all of her grief, anger, and confusion swirled together. The world felt unreal, suspended in the moments after the call. Was it a cruel joke? The disbelief weighed heavier than any grief. Marissa stared blankly at the floor, unable to process the shifting reality. The love she thought was lost, now returning like a forgotten memory. Marissa sat on the couch, her hands still trembling, as she gripped the edges of the fabric. The room felt quieter now, more suffocating. Her mind raced, and the words of the caller echoed over and over, refusing to leave her. How could it be true? How could her mother, the woman who had perished in the crash, be alive? She thought back to the day her life was torn apart, those hollow years spent in the absence of the one person she loved most. And yet, here she was, caught in a moment that made no sense, held in a fragile truth that threatened to undo everything. The emotions surged like a wave, crashing over her, leaving her breathless and lost. She could barely hold on to reality as it shifted beneath her feet, like the ground was vanishing. Was she ready for this? Could she face what lay ahead? The fear of uncovering more than just truth, of opening old wounds, stopped her cold. As Marissa sat, her mind wandered to the past, the days before everything fell apart. She thought about her mother's laughter, the way her smile could light up any room. It felt like a distant memory now, fading with each passing year. She could still hear her mother's voice in her head, but it felt like a ghost. A comforting presence she couldn't hold on to, yet so painful to remember. The idea that her mother might be alive somewhere felt like a dream, a cruel one perhaps. She wanted so badly to believe it, to fill the void that had consumed her heart for years. But what if it was a lie? What if it was just another cruel twist of fate? The aching emptiness that had always defined her life seemed to mock her, making her question if she was capable of rebuilding the connection that was ripped away from her so violently. Marissa picked up the phone again, her fingers hesitant over the dial. The voice on the other end had offered no answers, only more questions. She wanted to reach out to someone, to tell them what had just been revealed, but there was no one. Her friends, her family, everyone she once leaned on had drifted away over the years. They didn't understand the darkness she carried with her, the grief that never truly left. She was alone in this, and part of her feared that facing the truth would only open the door to even more loneliness. She pressed the button to call the number back, then stopped. The weight of uncertainty felt unbearable, but there was no turning back now. Marissa knew this was a call she had to make, for better or worse. She finally dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice, before a voice answered. It was calm, even warm, but Marissa could hear the edges of hesitation in it. "Is this Marissa?" the voice asked, and that was when everything felt real. The woman on the other end of the line wasn't a stranger. She knew her. "It's me, Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. Marissa's heart nearly stopped. The world around her seemed to tilt, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. She thought she was dreaming, but it wasn't a dream. It was a truth she hadn't prepared for. The woman on the phone was her mother, alive, and waiting to speak to her after all these years. The questions came fast. Why? How? Where have you been? But all she could do was listen, her mind racing to understand how her world had been turned upside down once again. Marissa's heart raced as the door creaked open. She had traveled all this way, but a sense of dread filled her chest. Standing before her was the man who had delivered the message, the one who had told her about her mother's survival. His face was weathered, with dark eyes that seemed to hold too many secrets. "You should have been here sooner," he muttered, his voice low. "There's more to this than you realize." The words lingered in the air like a cold breeze. Marissa took a hesitant step forward, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. Every instinct screamed for her to turn and run, but she couldn't. She needed to know. She needed the answers, no matter how much they might hurt. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. His gaze softened, but only for a moment. "It's not what you think," he said, the tone of his voice darkening. Marissa sat across from the man in a dusty, dimly lit room. The silence between them was thick with anticipation. She could hear the clock ticking on the wall, its rhythmic sound breaking the quiet. Her mind was in a whirlwind of confusion and anger. Why had her mother disappeared? What was he hiding? The man had finally begun to speak, but his words only deepened the mystery. "She wanted to keep you safe," he said quietly, his voice full of regret. "She didn't think you'd understand." Marissa clenched her fists. "Safe? How is running away from me, from her family, keeping me safe?" The man looked away, his eyes reflecting pain. "It's not that simple. There's more to the story. Things you're not ready to hear." But Marissa couldn't let go of the anger. 15 years of silence, of unanswered questions, had taken their toll. She wasn't going to walk away again, not without the truth. Marissa stormed out of the house, her anger seething. The man's words echoed in her mind. "She wanted to keep you safe." What kind of excuse was that? How could someone protect the people they loved by abandoning them? Her heart burned with unresolved questions, and the cold night air did nothing to cool her rage. She walked briskly down the overgrown path, her thoughts in a tangled mess. The weight of her past seemed to press down on her with every step she took. She had to know the full truth. If her mother had really survived, where had she been all these years? Why hadn't she reached out to her? She glanced at the streetlights ahead, their flickering glow offering little comfort. Marissa had been living a lie for so long, and now, everything she thought she knew was falling apart. Marissa returned home, her mind still racing. The entire conversation with the man felt like a blur, like a dream that refused to fade. She sat down at her kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from her. For years, she had waited for a call, for a message, for anything that might bring her mother back. But now, nothing seemed real. Her heart ached with the weight of so many questions. She picked up her phone again, the screen glowing in the dim light. The unknown number stared back at her, offering no answers. She hesitated before dialing it once more. The ringing seemed to stretch forever, and she began to wonder if she was truly prepared for what was about to come. She wasn't sure what she would hear, whether it would be the comfort she had been craving, or the final confirmation that her mother was lost to her forever. Marissa's finger hovered over the call button, her mind racing. The voice on the other end could be her mother, but it could also be another lie. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she almost pulled her hand away. But then, as if she couldn't stop herself, she pressed the button. The phone rang, and her heart pounded in her chest. She closed her eyes, waiting for the voice that had haunted her dreams for years. When it finally came, soft and familiar, Marissa's chest tightened. "Hello?" her mother's voice said, tentative yet filled with emotion. "Is this Marissa?" Marissa could barely speak, her emotions overwhelming her. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and longing. The world felt like it stopped spinning as the call connected. She had finally reached the one person she thought she had lost forever. The air in the room felt heavy as Marissa sat with the phone in her hand, still trembling from the call. Her mind couldn't process what she had just heard. Her mother, after all these years, was alive. But the truth came with consequences, secrets, betrayals, and lies. She thought of the life she had built in her mother's absence, the walls she had put up to protect herself. Yet, here was a chance to mend what had been broken, to bridge a gap that had never healed. She didn't know where to start, what to ask, or how to forgive. The void her mother had left was vast, but the thought of embracing that past, of rediscovering who she had been, left Marissa torn. Could she ever reconcile the woman she had become with the daughter she had once been? She wasn't sure if forgiveness was even possible, but she knew that the first step had to be understanding. The decision to meet was made in the blink of an eye. Marissa stood outside the cafe, her breath visible in the cold morning air. The weight of the decision pressed down on her chest. And yet, there was no turning back now. She had agreed to meet her mother, the woman who had vanished without a trace. The memories flooded her mind, of days spent waiting for a call that never came, of her father's broken silence after the accident. It was as if a part of her had been frozen in time, stuck in those moments of loss and confusion. Now, standing at the edge of something she wasn't prepared for, Marissa wondered if she was ready for the reunion that had been denied to her for so long. Was this the beginning of healing, or was it another chapter of disappointment? Her stomach churned, uncertainty creeping in. She took a deep breath and stepped forward into the unknown. Marissa entered the cafe, her eyes scanning the tables until they landed on a familiar face. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw her mother sitting at a corner booth, her back turned. The years had been kind to her mother. Her hair was shorter now, her face marked with time, but her presence was unmistakable. Marissa's breath caught in her throat as she took slow steps toward the table. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the anticipation nearly unbearable. Her mother looked up as she approached, and their eyes met for the first time in over a decade. The silence between them was overwhelming, as if they were both unsure of where to begin. "Marissa," her mother finally whispered, her voice trembling. The sound of her name coming from her mother's lips brought a rush of emotions. Anger, sorrow, longing. I didn't know how to find you," her mother said, her voice breaking. The conversation began awkwardly, the silence lingering longer than either of them would have liked. Marissa struggled to find the words to express her pain, while her mother seemed to be wrestling with her own emotions. She spoke of the years apart, explaining the reasons for her disappearance, reasons that, at first, Marissa couldn't understand. "I had to leave," her mother said softly. "I thought it was the only way to protect you." But Marissa couldn't hear the words. They felt empty. How could leaving be protection? She had been left alone with no explanation, no closure, and that hurt more than any reason could explain. "You don't understand," Marissa said through gritted teeth, her voice sharp with anger. "You don't get to just walk back into my life after all these years and tell me what was best for me." The bitterness in her words was hard to control, but it came pouring out, a flood of years of pain and resentment. Tears welled in Marissa's eyes as her mother reached across the table, her hand trembling. The gesture was tentative, as if unsure if Marissa would let her touch her. The distance between them felt impossible to bridge. And yet, the gesture was the first sign of real connection they had shared in years. Marissa wanted to pull away, to protect herself from the pain of reconnecting. But in that moment, the years of silence seemed to fall away, and she realized that no matter how much hurt was there, she still longed for the love of her mother. Slowly, she reached out, her fingers brushing against her mother's hand. The touch was fragile, uncertain, but it was a beginning. A small step towards healing, even if it wasn't clear yet how much work lay ahead. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Marissa whispered, her voice breaking, "but I'm willing to try." Marissa paced back and forth in her small apartment, her mind racing. The decision she had made earlier weighed heavily on her chest. Her mother had asked her to move in with her, to start over, to heal. But how could she? After so many years of abandonment, could she trust that her mother had truly changed? Every time she thought of the years she had spent alone, she felt a deep ache in her chest. The pain of losing someone she loved so much, only to have them return without explanation. It was hard to believe in second chances when the scars ran so deep. There was a part of her, fragile and tentative, that wanted to believe. She longed for the connection, the love that had once been hers, even if it meant risking everything again. The question was she ready? Was she strong enough to let go of the past and embrace the future, even with all the uncertainty that came with it? Later that night, Marissa met with her confidant Anna at their favorite cafe. The quiet hum of the coffee machine and the soft murmur of other patrons filled the air, but Marissa felt distant, lost in her thoughts. Anna watched her closely, sensing the turmoil. "You don't have to do this, you know," Anna said gently, her voice calm yet firm. "You don't owe anyone forgiveness, especially after everything you've been through." Marissa sighed deeply, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "But what if I'm wrong? What if this is my only chance to make things right? What if she really does want to fix things?" Anna's gaze softened. "Then you'll find peace, no matter what happens, but only if you're doing this for you, not for her." The words resonated deep within Marissa, but doubt still lingered. She didn't know if she could ever let go of the resentment she had carried for so long. The next day, Marissa stood at the door of her mother's house, her heart pounding in her chest. It felt like a lifetime since she had last seen her mother, and now, the weight of the past was pressing down on her. Her mother had invited her to dinner, a simple gesture meant to bridge the gap between them, but the emotions were anything but simple. As Marissa rang the doorbell, she felt the familiar sting of betrayal. Why had her mother left? Why had she never come back? The door opened, and Marissa was faced with her mother's tear-streaked face. "I'm so sorry," her mother whispered. Marissa stood frozen, unable to respond, the flood of emotions too overwhelming to contain. This was the moment that could change everything, or confirm her deepest fears. Dinner was quiet, filled only with the clink of silverware and the occasional soft sigh. Marissa's mother tried to make small talk, but Marissa could hardly focus on the words. She kept replaying the same questions in her mind. Why had her mother left? What was the real reason? But no matter how many times she asked, the answers always seemed to fall short. Her mother was apologetic, but her words felt empty, like a script she had practiced over and over. "I never wanted to hurt you," her mother said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marissa's eyes were fixed on her plate, her emotions tangled. "You didn't have to leave," Marissa replied quietly. "You could have stayed and fought for us." Her mother reached across the table, her hand trembling as she touched Marissa's. "I didn't know how to fight anymore," she whispered. The silence that followed was suffocating, filled with all the things they couldn't say to each other. Later that night, as Marissa left her mother's house, she felt an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. The conversation had opened old wounds, but it had also brought her closer to the truth. She was angry, hurt, and unsure, but a small part of her felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. It was fragile, delicate, but it was there. She didn't know if she could forgive her mother, but she was beginning to understand that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about facing the pain and deciding to move forward, despite it. Marissa stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the night sky, her thoughts still swirling. The road ahead would be long, and the past would always be a part of her. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of peace. The night before the hearing, Marissa couldn't sleep. The weight of the past few weeks hung heavy over her, each moment of clarity followed by intense doubt. She had spent years pushing away her emotions, building walls high enough to keep everyone out. Now, as she sat by the window of her apartment, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, she realized that the choice ahead of her wasn't just about her mother. It was about reclaiming control over her own life. She had the power to choose who stayed and who left, who she could forgive and who she couldn't. Forgiveness wasn't about the other person, it was about her. For the first time in years, Marissa understood that she had to stop carrying the burden of resentment, to let go of the past and embrace the future. She wasn't sure if she was ready to forgive her mother, but she was certain that she needed to heal. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment to take back her own peace. The next morning, Marissa drove to the courthouse, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The weight of what was about to happen pressed down on her chest. Her mother had asked for forgiveness, but it was a slow, painful process. Could they truly rebuild what had been lost? Marissa didn't know. All she knew was that she couldn't keep holding on to the anger that had been a constant companion for so many years. She was ready to listen, to understand, and perhaps to forgive. As she parked her car and walked toward the courthouse, a deep breath filled her lungs. She was stepping into the unknown, walking toward a future she had once thought was impossible. The decision she made today would change everything, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for the transformation. The path to healing was never easy, but it was the only one that would lead her out of the darkness. Inside the courtroom, Marissa sat quietly in the front row, her mother seated across from her, her face a mixture of hope and regret. The lawyer spoke about the potential for reconciliation, the need for forgiveness, but the words felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. Marissa wasn't sure if she could forgive everything. There was too much pain, too much time lost. But as she looked across at her mother, she saw the same longing for connection that had always been there. Perhaps forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. Perhaps it meant accepting the past for what it was and choosing to move forward anyway. The judge's voice broke through her thoughts, and for the first time Marissa realized that healing wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. The decision was in her hands. Could she let go of the past and allow herself to heal? After the hearing, Marissa and her mother walked out of the courthouse together. The air was crisp, the sunlight breaking through the clouds, signaling the beginning of a new chapter. Neither of them spoke at first. The silence between them felt comfortable now, not as awkward as it had been in the past. Marissa glanced at her mother, who was looking ahead, a soft smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I can't promise that everything will be okay," her mother said quietly. "But I'll be here. I'll always be here." Marissa nodded, the lump in her throat preventing her from speaking. Maybe this was the beginning of something, or maybe it was just one step on a long road. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was moving in the right direction. The anger had faded, and while forgiveness was still a work in progress, the path to healing had finally begun. That night, Marissa sat alone in her apartment, her thoughts a swirl of emotions. She wasn't sure where the journey would lead, but she knew it was only the beginning. Healing didn't happen overnight. It was a slow process, one filled with setbacks and breakthroughs. But for the first time, Marissa felt like she was taking control of her life again. She had been carrying the weight of her past for so long, but now it seemed lighter, not because it had disappeared, but because she had learned to carry it differently. She thought of her mother, sitting across from her, offering a genuine chance at reconciliation. Could she fully forgive? Maybe not yet. But she was learning to let go, one step at a time. The future was uncertain, but tonight there was a flicker of hope, a spark that would slowly grow into something brighter. Marissa closed her eyes, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. Tomorrow, she would continue moving forward. Marissa stood by the window, the early morning light spilling into her apartment. It had been a few months since the court hearing, and she could feel the subtle shifts in her life, like a quiet undercurrent of change. Her relationship with her mother was still fragile, but it was no longer defined by bitterness. It was still a journey, one that required patience, but they were finding their way. There were days when the pain resurfaced, when old wounds ached and threatened to pull her back into darkness. But there were also moments of clarity, where the future felt wide open, and for the first time in years, Marissa could breathe. Her past was no longer a burden, but a story she was ready to tell without shame. She had come to realize that healing wasn't a destination. It was a lifelong process. And today, she was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that she could face it head on. Marissa met her mother again, this time without the weight of unresolved anger clouding her judgment. They sat together at a small cafe, each nursing a cup of coffee. It felt different now, less like a confrontation and more like a conversation between two people trying to rebuild what had been lost. Her mother spoke of the years spent apart, of the guilt that weighed heavily on her, but Marissa listened now, not with the sharp edge of resentment, but with an open heart. She was beginning to understand that forgiveness wasn't just a gift to the other person, but a gift to herself. It was the freedom to let go of the past and embrace the present. "I know I can't undo what I've done," her mother said softly, "but I'm here now, and I'll never leave again." Marissa nodded, her eyes meeting her mother's, and for the first time she truly believed it. There was still a long road ahead, but this was a step in the right direction. Later that week, Marissa spent time with her confidant, Anna, walking through the park. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the path. It was moments like these that Marissa cherished, quiet, unhurried, where she could reflect on how far she had come. "I feel like a different person," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. Anna smiled, her eyes full of understanding. "You are," she replied. "You've shed the weight of the past, and now you're stepping into something new." Marissa looked around at the park, the vibrant colors of the sunset contrasting with the green of the trees. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the people who had stood by her, especially Anna, whose loyalty had never wavered. The future no longer felt intimidating. It felt full of possibilities. For the first time, she was ready to take those steps forward. Marissa's phone rang, interrupting the quiet evening. It was her mother again, calling to check in. They had been talking more regularly now, but every conversation still felt new, as though they were still learning to communicate. "I know we can't go back," her mother said, her voice laced with sincerity. "But I want to be here for you, however you need me." Marissa paused, taking in the weight of her mother's words. She had spent so many years wanting this, her mother's presence, her support. But now that it was here, it felt different. More fragile, more real. "I'm not sure what that looks like yet," Marissa replied honestly, "but I'm willing to figure it out with you." The truth hung in the air, but there was no longer fear or resentment, only the slow, steady promise of rebuilding something broken, piece by piece. That evening, Marissa stood in front of her mother's house once again. The air was crisp and the world seemed still. This time, she wasn't coming with anger, resentment, or the weight of the past on her shoulders. She was coming with an open heart, ready to take that next step forward. Her mother opened the door, her face lighting up with a smile. "You made it," she said softly. Marissa smiled back, a genuine, unguarded smile. "I'm here," she replied, her voice filled with hope. The door opened wider, and Marissa stepped inside, no longer carrying the heavy burden of the past. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that, for the first time, she was walking into it with her eyes wide open and her heart ready to embrace what was ahead. Marissa stood by the window, the world outside bright with the morning sun. It had been a long, winding journey, one full of pain, reconciliation, and most of all, change. Looking back at the last few months, she saw how far she had come. Her relationship with her mother was no longer a constant battle, but a quiet understanding. There were still moments of uncertainty, of questioning whether forgiveness was enough, but those moments were fewer now. Marissa had let go of the weight that once defined her, her anger, her grief, and her fear. She had found peace in her own heart, a place where she could breathe again. The road ahead was still unknown, but that was okay. For the first time, she didn't need to have all the answers. All she needed was to keep moving forward, knowing that the future, though uncertain, was full of possibility. Marissa sat at her kitchen table, the warmth of the teacup in her hands grounding her. Her mother had called earlier, inviting her over for dinner again, and for the first time, Marissa felt eager to go. There were no more walls between them, no more hesitation. The space between them had been filled with forgiveness, and with each passing day, their bond was growing stronger. It wasn't perfect, and it might never be, but it was real. Marissa was finally allowing herself to be open to the possibilities of the future, not bound by the scars of the past. The emptiness that once surrounded her heart had softened, replaced by a quiet joy that had been a long time coming. She had started living for herself again, and it was the most liberating feeling she had ever known. Later that evening, Marissa and her mother sat together in the living room, talking freely about everything and nothing. For the first time, there were no walls between them. Their conversation was easy, the words flowing naturally as they laughed about old memories and shared new ones. Marissa realized that this was what she had been waiting for, not the perfect resolution, but the genuine connection they now shared. There were still unanswered questions, still scars that would take time to heal, but they were building something new, something stronger. As her mother smiled at her, Marissa knew that it was okay to let go of the past and embrace the future. They could build something together, one step at a time. As Marissa stood by the door to leave, she turned back to her mother. There was still a world of unspoken words between them, but that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that they were here, together, in this moment. "Thank you," Marissa said, her voice soft but full of meaning. Her mother looked at her, her eyes glistening with emotion, and simply nodded. "No matter what happens, I'll always be here," her mother replied. Marissa smiled, feeling the weight of her words sink deep into her chest. It wasn't the grand gestures that mattered. It was the quiet, consistent presence of someone who truly cared. Marissa realized that this was what family was, not perfection, but the willingness to show up, no matter how much time had passed. Marissa walked home that night with a lighter heart. The city was quieter than usual, the night air cool and refreshing. As she passed familiar streets and storefronts, she realized that she was no longer burdened by the past. The weight she had carried for so long had lifted, replaced by a sense of peace. She had reconciled with the past, not by forgetting, but by accepting it for what it was. And now, with the future ahead of her, she felt ready to face whatever came next. There was a new chapter unfolding, one where she was no longer shackled by fear or doubt. She was walking forward, not because she had all the answers, but because she knew she had the strength to handle whatever life threw her way. For the first time in years, she felt free.